Proverbs 26 is called, or I called it, a catalog of fools. Some have called it the mirror of fools. It's various titles related to that. And it is, the first 12 verses are instructions regarding a fool. And then the rest of the chapter, verses 13 to 28, describes various kinds of folly. So I would say verse 12 verses, it speaks of fools in general. And then the last 17 verses describe and specify the fools and specific fools that you may be confronted with. It is a vivid chapter. It is full of similes. So they're like and as throughout this chapter. I'll just give you one example. Verse 8, like one who binds a stone in a sling is he who gives honor to a fool. I mean, it's a very picturesque description there, very vivid with that. And what it does for us is it paints the picture of the fool in very vivid colors and very memorable fashion, so that hopefully we remember at least some of these traits of the fool. Now, as we've gone through the book of Proverbs, I've said that there is really a spectrum of folly presented. So the least foolish of the fools is the simple. And I think we rightly would call him a fool because the simple is not on the path to wisdom yet. He is at a crossroads maybe. He is teachable. He's not confirmed in folly, but he is not wise. And he's not on the path to wisdom. So we need to call the simple the fool, but he is the simple fool. Does anybody remember what's the opposite end of the spectrum from the simple? Yeah, the scoffer. He is the one who is arrogant, is unteachable, is dangerous and destructive. He is nearly beyond hope in Proverbs. He is the one that is just willful and stubborn in his foolishness. In between, you have several different other words for the fool in the book of Proverbs. And there's overlap. Again, there's a spectrum here, but you have overlap between these various kinds of fools. And there's one particular word that is used here in Proverbs 26 of a fool. And let me give you one definition of this kind of fool. He is one who is innately stupid. So he's presented in Proverbs as thoroughly negative, but there is at least hope for reformation, for him to change. But it's iffy. Maybe it's very likely to be futile to call on this one to change, but there is a slight hope. So this fool is a very general kind. Maybe I might even say that he is just a couple steps up from the simple. He's not far down the road to confirmation in his folly, but he has certainly chosen the path of folly, and he is walking it, and he generally resists efforts to turn him aside. Again, he's not beyond hope, far from it, but he is going to be difficult to deal with. And that's the kind of person that is being described in Proverbs 26. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through very quickly the various descriptions that are here, and I'm going to spend probably the majority of my time in how do we respond to the fool. But we start off in verse 1. It says, as snow in summer and rain in harvest, so honor is not fitting for a fool. So I'm not going to do this with every verse as we walk through, but what kind of parallelism is that? The illustrating Proverbs, he is drawing a picture. Is snow in summer really a good thing? If you live in an arid climate where you're used to heat and you're not used to snow in the summer is really a bad thing. Is rain, this one we do recognize more fully. You get a rainstorm in the middle of harvest, that's no good at all. Yeah, that's what he's saying. That's the picture he's drawing. This is not a good thing. These are not good things, nor is it good. It is not fitting or proper to give honor to a fool. So the fool does not deserve to be exalted, to be honored. In fact, that proverb I read in verse 8, like one who binds a stone in a sling. So you picture this. I mean, you picture a guy, he's going into battle. He has his sling. He has the large stone that he's ready to put in the pouch. And he decides, well, I know I'm going to be running a long distance and I've got a ways to go before I get into battle. I don't want to lose my stone. So he wraps a bunch of rope around the stone and the pocket of the sling. And he ties the stone into that sling. And then he gets to battle. And he starts, whipping the sling over his head. I trust you've seen or taught the David Sunday school lessons enough. You know that David would have had a sling at one end he held in his hand, and then at the right time he would let go of one end, and it would fling this stone out. Now what happens if you tie a stone in the pocket of your sling, you whip it around, and then you let go? Yeah, it's going to come back at you. You're going to end up with a headache more than likely. And at the very least, as Gene said, it's going to be incredibly ineffective. It's probably going to be self-destructive. That's what he says. The one who gives honor to a fool injures himself. So the fool does not deserve honor. Instead, he deserves judgment. A whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the fool's back. And we don't live in a culture that we execute any kind of corporal punishment on in our court system. So I do think it'd be a good idea, but we don't do that. But it was very common in Solomon's day, and really very common throughout most of history, that certain ones would be flogged. They would be beaten, or we might even say spanked with a rod, or sometimes with a whip of various kinds. And it was a definite judgment. It was a punishment. And what Solomon is saying in this is it's proper, it's normal to use the whip to move the horse. You put a bridle on the donkey to control the donkey. So what do you do with this with fool? How do you direct and control him? With pain. You make him see that if he does this, it's going to physically hurt him. And there's some direction there of him through punishment, and that he actually deserves, it is fitting and proper to him to have this punishment. The fool also is untrustworthy. He who sends a message, verse 6, he who sends a message by the hand of a fool cuts off his own feet and drinks violence. Again, vivid picture. So if you're going to entrust a message to a fool, you might as well be lame, because he's going to do nothing for you. He's going to be as useless as if you were stuck in a wheelchair. And in fact, the suggestion of the imagery here is that this is a message between kings, maybe a message between opposing generals in a battle, but between officials. And if the message isn't properly carried, the result is going to be warfare. So if you're going to send a message, you're there, you're lined up on one side of the battle, your opponent's lined up on the other side of the battle, and you have an opportunity to make peace. You desire to make peace. You're pretty sure he wants to make peace, and so you find the fool, the guy that you can't trust to do anything at all. You give him a piece of luggage, and he sets it down and walks away and forgets about it. So you take him and take this important message to gain peace, and you entrust it to his hand and say, now you take it over to that general. You're cutting off your own feet. You're drinking violence up. You might as well just go charge the enemy right now, because you're just wasting time. It's that unhelpful and untrusted. The fool is so untrustworthy, he is actually harmful to what you would desire to do. And I imagine that we've all seen this in different scenarios in our lives. Somebody at work that he's given a particular assignment. He is being depended upon to accomplish this portion of his assignment. I think Jim, you work or have worked in a setting where people are given pieces of assignments. Is that correct? What happens if one person doesn't do the assignment given to him and doesn't give the information by the time you need it? So the job falls apart, you don't get it done, so you're out, the company's out money because they paid for all the time and energy of everybody else. Probably have lost reputation. I would think at that point, other people would say, well, they can't get the job done. We're not going to hire them anymore. It is destructive to trust a fool in that way. Likewise, the fool is unhelpful, like the legs of the lame that hang limp. Again, a vivid picture. You have a paraplegic sitting in his wheelchair. There is no strength in his legs. None at all. They are completely limp, powerless to do anything. That's what he says. That's what he compares to a proverb in the mouth of fools. As we've gone through the book of Proverbs, we have examined hundreds of proverbs. We have closely examined dozens of them. And how would you define, just very briefly, how would you define a proverb? That's a great summary of it. A short, pithy statement, usually memorable, but a short, pithy statement that describes divine truth, describes wisdom. So a proverb can be a very good and beneficial thing. It can be powerful when properly applied to a life. Let me give you a modern example. All things work together for good to them who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. Is that a powerful truth? Absolutely is. It is, should be for the Christian, a comforting truth, a reassuring truth, a strengthening truth that enables us to walk through difficult times and to do so with joy and confidence. But you take that same truth and you put it in the mouth of a thoughtless and careless person who, in the most frequent misuse of this seems to be at funerals, who walks up to a grieving wife and says, all things work together for good. And just thrown out there. And it's not a help. And in fact, I know in some cases it becomes a hindrance. Not because the truth is wrong, but because the one who used it didn't know how to use it. He was foolish and careless in the explanation or in the proclamation of it. And so you take one of these great proverbs. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Some great truth in there. But the fool can take that truth and he can crush a parent's spirit. He can lay a burden on them that is deeply disheartening. So that instead of giving them encouragement and help as it was intended, it actually becomes a destructive thing. It becomes almost powerless in their life, hurtful and damaging. That's what he's saying. The fool who gets hold of a kernel of wisdom, that's what a proverb is a little kernel of wisdom, but he doesn't know what to do with it. And so it becomes powerless. He also, as I've already said, he is incredibly dangerous. Like a thorn that goes into the hand of a drunkard is a proverb in the mouth of fools. So in the Middle East, there are thorns. We have thorns. We have little briars on our blackberries. You might have rose bushes that have thorns on them. The thorns that were very common in that area were thorns. They are toothpicks in size. They're vicious. And so to drive one of those things into your hand takes quite a bit of carelessness. That's why he calls it a drunkard. He refers to a drunkard doing it, because you have to be that thoughtless to just imagine driving a finishing nail into your hand. And that's what he's talking about. That's the kind of picture. You take this thing and you just stab yourself deeply with this painful thorn. And he says that's what it's like to put a proverb in the mouth of a fool. So again, as I've already said, they take in these biblical truths, and the fool begin to just toss them about. It's destructive. It's hurtful. It hurts others around him, hurts himself even, because he doesn't know how to properly use it. Is a chainsaw a good tool? Yeah, they really are. They're great tools. As Davey was growing up, my son was growing up, I tried to teach him how to use various tools. But I did not, even when he was like 8 or 9 years old, I did not give him my chainsaw and say, no, go to town. Just cut whatever you want, get practice with it, have fun. Yeah, because he very well could severely injure himself, very well, drop a tree on a house or car or on somebody else, and all number of bad things could happen because he does not have the wisdom or the skill in this case to properly use a chainsaw. And putting a proverb in the hand of a fool is giving a chainsaw to a young child, and letting him just run with it. It's dangerous. So the lack of wisdom really renders him unable to properly apply a proverb. Remember, wisdom is not just knowledge; it is the ability to rightly apply that knowledge. And the fool doesn't have it. So he can have some learning, some knowledge, but he can't apply it. Verse 11, the fool is often incorrigible. As a dog returns to his own vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. This is so common around us. And this phrase is so vivid. Peter uses it to describe false teachers. They're like dogs that return to their vomit. I mean, you've seen it. If you have a dog, you've seen this at some point in time. That which made him sick, he throws up. And so what does he do later? Goes back and eats it again. And it's even less appetizing than whatever weird thing he ate the first time was. It's intended to be a gross picture. It really is. It's intended to turn our stomach a little bit to show how disgusting it is that the fool returns to his folly. But we've seen this. We see it all the time. Somebody, is in drug addiction. They're in a life of addiction, and they get help. They start getting out and get clean. How many times do they return to it? They return to the same thing that was destroying their life, was destroying their health, was destroying their relationships. It was rendering them really unable to function. And despite all of the misery it caused them, and despite the fact that they maybe were clean for a while, they go back to it. And the fool in his folly looks at those things and says, I want that. He has not learned wisdom. He's not walked down the path of wisdom to know true life. And so he still thinks that folly is the way to live. And so he is frequently going to go back to his own wickedness. Verse 10, he is punished by God. And this is, verse 10, let me read it in the New King James. It says, the great God who formed everything gives the fool his hire and the transgressor his wages. So keep looking at your Bibles, verse 10. Let me read the translation of that same verse from the English Standard Version. It says, like an archer who wounds everyone is one who hires a passing fool or a drunkard. Does that sound like the verse you're looking at? No, not at all. And the translations actually are divided between these two very completely different renderings of this verse. And so it's what it boils down to is it's just incredibly difficult. The Hebrew that's used, we don't really know what some of it means, honestly. And so we're doing the best we can to make sense of it, and those are the two options. That it's either God punishes the fool, or it is foolish to hire a passing fool or drunkard. Obviously, I'm taking the side of the New King James. The fool is punished by God, and so however you translate this verse, it fits either way with the truths conveyed here. So even though this is an incredibly challenging verse to translate, whichever way you translate it, it conforms to biblical truth, the truths already taught and being taught in Proverbs. So even though all that we've said about the fool is true, the fool is not beyond hope. He says, do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than him. But this fool, there is hope for him. There may not be a lot of hope, but there is some hope for the fool. And that's important. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes here. So then you hit verse 13 down to verse 16, and we meet the lazy fool. So it says, the lazy man says, there's a lion in the road, a fierce lion is in the street. As a door turns on its hinges, so does the lazy man on his bed. The lazy man buries his hand in the bowl. It wearies him to bring it back to his mouth. The lazy man is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. So I'm not going to spend long on this because we've touched on it before here, but really the foolishness of the lazy one. I mean, he starts off and he makes excuses. I can't go to work today because there's a lion in the street. If I go outside, I'm going to get eaten. I mean, it's ridiculous. But this is the lazy fool. Well, any excuse will do to not go do what he needs to do. He sleeps for a very long time. He just turns back and forth on his bed, just like a door swinging. He just rolls to one side, swings to the other side, swings back and forth. Long past when he should be awake, he's still in bed. He is burdened by everything. He puts his hand in the food dish, and this is very, very picturesque. You picture somebody sitting there on the couch, got a big bowl of Doritos on his belly, and he puts his hand in, and he grabs a Dorito, and he is so tired out by the effort that he can't even bring it up to his mouth. As much as he wants that Dorito, he is so exhausted, and his laziness is such that he just can't be bothered. I mean, again, this is hyperbole. It's exaggeration to make a point, but he truly is burdened by everything, by even good things. In verse 16, he is arrogant. He truly thinks he knows more than anyone else, so that he's wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. So you bring 7 wise men to the lazy fool, and they begin to exhort him and to explain to him the consequences of his laziness. And he will have a reason for every objection they offer. He'll have an explanation. He'll have an excuse. He'll have a justification, so that whatever they say to him, they don't understand. They don't know his situation. They don't really see the full picture. Only he does. And you bring in the 7 wisest men that have ever lived, and the lazy fool is still going to say, nope, you don't understand. You don't know enough about this. I'm right, and you can't tell me otherwise. It's absolute arrogance. I would say it's also the laziness that refuses to even think. As it does take effort to consider, to think through. Here's what they're telling me. It takes thought and effort to even say, is this true? They tell me if I continue to go down this path, that I'm going to end up broke. I'm going to end up with severe diabetes, and I'm going to be living in a nursing home, and my legs will be cut off at the knees when I'm 50. And can I consider this? Will the lazy one look at it and say, is this true? Is this a possibility? Does this happen? And nope, he doesn't care to look. He can't be bothered to think. He's too lazy. He is so content in his own knowledge that he won't even bother thinking. And so he ends up really just for his own destruction. And then you have what I will call a troublemaking fool. Verse 18 and 19, he says, like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death. I mean, to bring it in modern day, like a teenager who walks into the school with a loaded rifle and starts shooting. That's the kind of character he's talking about. That's the kind of imagery he's drawing. Like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and then says, I was only joking. The man who defrauds his neighbor is a destroyer. And so this troublemaking fool is one who makes harmful jokes. And in the context, it's not a joke. It's after the fact, when he's been caught, he says, oh, he's just kidding. It was only a joke. And he is an incredibly destructive one. Verse 20, where there is no wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no talebearer, strife ceases. Verse 22, the words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost body. Our natural tendency is to really like the juicy tidbits of gossip. We like hearing something about somebody, especially somebody we don't quite like. And it satisfies us in a way, in an appropriate way, in a sinful way. And yet we find that this gossip is a troublemaker. He is one who stirs the fire. He is the one, he's not just throwing wood on the fire, he's got bellows and he is pumping as hard as he can to get that fire raging. And he is a gossip who just divides. I think it's the King James that says they burn into the innermost part of the body. It's not a good thing. I don't think it's not describing this as a really good, satisfying thing. It tastes good when you first hear it, but it's destructive. It gives the worst kind of heartburn. He also hides his hatred with lies. Verse 23, fervent lips with a wicked heart are like earthenware, covered with silver dross. What is dross? So when you're purifying silver, the dross is what's going to float to the surface. It's going to be the impurities. So you take a clay pot, earthenware, which was absolute most basic kind of vessels that they would have had. And so everybody had them. They're all over the place. We still have, they had them so much, archaeology is constantly digging up little potsherds, little fragments of broken pots, because everybody had them. And then when they were broken, they were broken. That was it. There was nothing you could do with them. They were cheap enough that you broke one, you replace it. And so you take this worthless pot and you cover it with silver dross, the leftovers from purifying silver, not the pure silver, the stuff you took out of the silver. Is that worth anything? No, not at all. It's absolutely worthless. And so he says that fervent lips, so speak well, speak loving words, flattering words, tell you how wonderful you are, but the heart hates you. Is that worth anything? No, not worth anything at all. It's worth as much as the impurities and leftovers when you refine metal. It's worthless. Verse 26, though his hatred is covered by deceit, his wickedness will be revealed before the assembly. At some point in time, this troublemaking fool will be discovered. And when he is, he will suffer. Verse 27 says, he who digs a pit will fall into it, And he who rolls a stone will have it roll back on him. I know we touched on this a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to repeat all I said about that verse, but just simply to say that he's going to suffer the consequences of his own action. The harm that he desires to do will come back on him. Verse 28, this troublemaking fool hates. It says a lying tongue hates those who are crushed by it. So go back up to verse 18 and 19. Like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. We have the liar. He's a liar at the beginning. He's a liar at the end. And he hates those who are harmed by his lies. He does not obey the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. He hates them. And he harms others. Verse 28, a lying tongue hates those who are crushed by it, and a flattering mouth works ruin. So his kind-sounding words, his earthenware covered in silver dross, works ruin. It's worthless and destructive. So this troublemaking fool is one ultimately we should have nothing to do with. Then we get to Proverbs 26, verses 4 and 5. How do we respond to the fool? Let me read the two verses. It says, do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. So we have now the real challenge. What do we do with the fool? We should recognize immediately these are not contradictory verses. This is not a contradiction in the Bible. I mean, really, I can't imagine any author would be so foolish as to put two contradictory sentences back to back. At least he would be smart enough to spread them out. The fact that they are put side by side tells us something about how these two verses function. So before I get to your outline, let me give you kind of an overview of these first 12 verses, because there's a lot going on here that's very, very important in how we understand verses 4 and 5. So you have verses 1, 2, and 3. You have a series of responses. You have, it is improper to give honor to a fool. I skipped over verse 2, but the short version of that is the curse there is not, don't think of, like a witch and casting an evil spell on somebody. I think it's best understood as actually judgment. So if you remember Israel, before they went in the promised land, they stood on each side of the two mountains and they shouted the blessings and the cursings. The cursings were the judgments that would come on them for their disobedience to God. So it wasn't as if somebody cast a magic spell on them that was going to cause harm to them. He's not saying that I can say something, or that back in this time in Israel that you could say something and make something bad happen. Rather, it's punishment. And I think that's borne out by where he immediately goes in verse 3 when he talks about the rod for the fool's back. And so the judgment, punishment that is unjustified. So judgment and punishment on the innocent will not fall on them. It will not land on them. So that's what he's saying there, is that that the innocent one is not going to suffer. And again, remember, this is a proverb. It's not an absolute promise. Verse 3, then you have, it is proper to punish the fool. And then you have verse 4, do not answer a fool according to his folly. And so we're talking about responses to a fool in the first 4 verses. And then verse 5, he then says, though, answer a fool. Why? Lest he be wise in his own eyes. Skip down to verse 12. Do you see a man wise in his own eyes there's more hope for a fool than for him. And so there's a connection here between really what's going on in verses 6 through 11 in talking about really the folly of trusting a fool to do anything and the danger of a fool, the judgment, verse 10, the judgment that God will bring on a fool. But we see that there is still some hope for him. Even though he may suffer, he may have to suffer, he may be judged, there's still some hope for him. So what these 12 verses tell us is there is a wrong response to a fool. In fact, there's a variety of wrong responses to a fool. And there is a right response to a fool. The wrong response to a fool will confirm or comfort him in his folly. So you exalt a fool, he's not going to think, boy, now I've got this position, I need to learn wisdom. He's going to be content where he is because he didn't need wisdom to get here. Why would he need wisdom now? You're going to comfort and confirm him in his folly. Or, verse 5, if you don't confront him, you don't respond to his folly, he'll be wise in his own eyes. And so the lack of response will actually comfort him. He'll think, I'm okay. I'm good in this. However, there is a risk in responding to a fool. The risk is in verse 4, the wise may become like the fool in that interaction with the fool. And so to answer a fool in his folly risks becoming foolish yourself. But again, there is also risk in not responding to a fool. The risk is that the fool may think silence is affirming his own wisdom. And again, he becomes wise in his own eyes. So we have to weigh both things. We also have to remember some fools are correctable, some are not. So we go to the scoffer, to jump out of this chapter for a second, and we learn that the scoffer is more or less uncorruptible. The response to a scoffer is to drive him out, to have nothing to do with him. The response to a scoffer is not to plead with him and teach him, but to remove him or get away from him. Some fools are correctable. Some in this category here may be correctable, but some of them are going to return to their folly. And so what these two verses tell us, to simplify it and bring it down to where it is sometimes the wise will respond to a fool. Sometimes the wise will not. And it takes wisdom to know which. So, good luck, right? Then this is really, I would say this is the master's course in wisdom right there. How do I respond to a fool? When do I respond to a fool? That's what all of this comes back down to. And so Proverbs presents to us both the possibility of the wrong response and the possibility of a right response. We should not fear, as we're thinking through this, the thing it doesn't warn us about is that the fool's going to say something bad to you. It does warn us elsewhere. The fool will be angry. He will not receive it. But it doesn't present that to us as a reason to say, well, don't ever confront the fool. Because there is a possibility of a right response. What should worry us more is not the fool's response, but what's happening in my own heart. Am I becoming like the fool and interacting with the fool? And so as you're thinking through and you're still trying to say, well, how do I know whether or not I answer a fool or not? I would say one of the prime factors is teachability or possible teachability in the fool. So as you're interacting with this one, you know him to be a fool. Does he seem to be willing to listen? And if he is not, that's probably a pretty good indication you should just keep your mouth shut. If there's a possibility he is willing to listen, then maybe you need to answer, provided you can answer in such a way that you do not get sucked down into folly. How do you respond? And I believe I borrowed these mostly from Answers in Genesis, and I will stress this again. These are not the interpretation of these two verses, but these are applications from the verses. And so what the verses are saying are what they say. Do not answer, do answer. And it's almost identical phrases that are being used. But how this may look, do not enter into his way of thinking. So don't accept the fool's assumptions. Certainly do not stoop down to the fool's level. Don't enter into his way of thinking about this. And there are times where you just have to cut off the conversation. If the argument has descended into folly, if it's not going anywhere, walk away. You may just say, we're done. Example, I have in some situations, if somebody's struggling with a relationship with an individual, they call on the phone, maybe they berate them or they're just haranguing them about this, that, and the other. I've instructed people in the past, hang up. Tell them, I'm not going to listen to this. This is not profitable. This is not godly. This is not edifying. If you don't stop, I'm hanging up. If they don't stop, don't say anything else, hang up. Cut off the conversation. And that may be more of an abrupt ending than we normally would have, but it may come to that in certain situations. So you do not enter into the fool's way of thinking. And if you can, show him the error of his thinking. And this is part of what Jim was saying would go to is the practical experience of, yes, if you try it like that, this bad thing is going to happen. And so if you can show ahead of time and say, if you design an intersection in this way, let me model it on the computer, see all of these semis crashing into one another because of your design choice. If you create this circle that requires you to go right to go left, look at the horrible consequences it's going to cause in our whole society. I don't think it's any coincidence that these roundabouts have popped up about the same time that American culture has fractured. So that's a bad example. That is a good example of correlation is not causation. Just because two things happen at roughly the same time doesn't mean one caused the other there. But anyway, so you would show the error of his thinking. If you can show I'll give you an example that's been used in apologetics. People say all truth is relative. And some have retorted and said, well, some cultures say love your neighbor, others say eat your neighbor. Which is better? Which do you prefer? So that shows, it shows the error of the thinking without accepting their assumptions, but it basically draws out their assumptions and shows the logic and where it will go if it's applied consistently. And that may be a way of doing that. Part of it as well, we go back to verse 3, and corporal punishment. There is consequences. Part of the way sometimes we show the fool the error of his thinking is through punishment. This is how we train children. We teach them, but we also punish them when we show, look, there are consequences. If you do this, there are consequences to this. And it's not simply because we want them to do all of our bidding, but we want ultimately to teach them to obey the Lord. We want to teach them how to make good decisions, how to function well in society to the glory of God. And so you can take, in that case, a child. Scripture tells us that folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but it is the rod which will drive it from him. And so that may be necessary to bring consequences. And so, I'll go back to Jim's example of the stupid college kid that comes in and he won't listen to reason. And so you say, okay, go ahead, do it your way. And then when he does that and it completely fails, he now is, he's lost the commission or whatever he may have lost there. Actually now, even may possibly charge him to clean up the mess that he made, to fix the damage that he did, so that there are consequences to the bad thinking. It's not just that didn't work, but that didn't work and now it's going to cost you. So if the wise does not correct the fool may believe his own delusions and become locked in his folly. I mean to race through the application. I apologize, but to keep it about an hour, I'm going to do these real fast. So what do we do? How do we apply this to folly? Do not make the fool your friend. He's not going to be good for you. Do not make the fool your friend. Limit your attempts to teach a fool. Do not follow folly. Do not be like the fool and refuse to listen, but listen and learn from the fool to consider well the consequences of your actions and lifestyle. Do not make the fool your friend. Limit your attempts to teach a fool. Do not follow folly. Listen and consider well the consequences of your actions and lifestyle. 2 things. Do your own work and don't be too lazy to learn. Think well about what you are doing. Do your own work. Think well about what you're doing. All right? And then how do we respond to the troublemaker? Avoid cutting humor. Don't be like that. And I know we joke and we do poke at each other at times. We need to be very careful that we recognize the limits of that and we avoid hurtful and destructive humor. Reject inflammatory speech. Gossip should have no part in the Christian life. Slander should have no part in the Christian life. Grumbling, murmuring, complaining, backbiting. None of those should be true of the Christian. Speak truth. And I've already touched on this, but do not gossip. Be a peacemaker, not a troublemaker. Be a peacemaker. Do not trust the hateful and the bitter. I mean, really, we know this. If somebody's saying evil things to you about somebody else, what makes you think they're not going to say bad things about you to the other person? They're not going to be trustworthy. Don't trust the hateful and the bitter. Speak well of others and seek the good of others. Don't be like the troublemaker. Don't be like the gossip. Speak well. Don't be like the liar, the deceiver, the hateful. Seek good.